The new girl quits within a week. That was Dr. Hargrove's prediction, stated loud enough for everyone in the ER to hear it. He didn't see what was coming. He didn't see the surgical precision in her hands as she restocked the crash cart in room 304, the way she positioned each syringe at the exact angle for fastest retrieval. He didn't see the faded unit patch sewn inside her jacket lining, the one that had traveled through 2 wars and marked her as someone who'd already died once and chosen not to stay dead. Katie Rodriguez moved through Mercy General's ER like water finding its path. 3 weeks in, and she knew every supply closet, every back stairwell, every exit route. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical song above her, and when she reached for the 4 line in room 304, those lights caught the white scar tissue on her forearms, thin lines that mapped out a narrative nobody here would ever read. She paused at the bedside. Jensen lay there, his eyes open but vacant. Traumatic brain injury had hollowed him out, left him breathing but absent. She studied the tattoo on his forearm. Rodriguez. Her name. Written in faded ink across skin that had belonged to a man she'd carried through 2 miles of Tikrit gunfire while rounds punched holes in the air around them. The same man who'd written her name on his body when his mind was sharp and his legs could still carry him. Now he stared at nothing. She adjusted his blankets with the gentleness of someone who'd touched the dying at 3 a.m. in the dark, when there were no witnesses, when mercy was the only language left. Her jaw tightened for exactly 1 second. Then she breathed. Once. Slow. And moved to the next task. The antiseptic smell didn't bother her, nothing clinical bothered her anymore. Hospitals were just a different kind of combat zone, and she'd learned to read them the way she'd learned to read a room full of armed men, angles, exits, threat assessments. Her vitals monitoring was textbook. Her medication rounds moved at half the time of his senior nurses. She charted with the precision of someone who understood that paperwork saved lives as much as CPR did. Every notation was exact, every timestamp correct, every dosage verified twice. Pain was information. Everything was data. Dr. Hargrove watched her from the nurse's station, his eyes narrowing the way a predator's eyes narrow when it spots movement it doesn't understand. He was 56, 12 pounds overweight, and had coasted through the last 20 years on a last name that came from money and a network that protected mediocrity like it was a national resource. His Rolex caught the fluorescent light. His Italian loafers were buffed to a shine that required someone else's labor. He'd been chief resident at Denver Presbyterian for 3 years before Mercy General had recruited him with a promise of departmental autonomy and a salary that didn't require justification to a board. He had power. He had position. He had the kind of institutional protection that came from knowing the right people at the right country clubs. What he didn't have was competence. And competence, when it appeared in the form of a quiet woman who didn't need his approval, threatened everything. Katie completed her assessment of the patient in Trauma Bay 2, a 68-year-old with chest pain and a heart rate climbing steadily toward 130. She documented the 12-lead EKG findings, noted the ST elevation in leads 2, 3, AVF, and flagged it for immediate cardiology consult. She moved like someone who'd done this in the dark, under fire, with supplies that were expired 3 years ago and prayers that probably didn't count. Her hands moved on their own, muscle memory taking over, her body speaking a language her voice never would. That's when Hargrove's voice cut across the ER floor. Loud. Casual. The kind of casual that was calculated. $50, he announced to the assembled staff, nurses, techs, resident physicians, anyone within earshot. $50 says the new girl quits within a week. The room didn't freeze. This wasn't a moment where everyone gasped or went silent. This was worse. This was the kind of moment where people kept doing their work because they'd learned not to acknowledge cruelty when it came from above them. The ventilator in room 305 wheezed its mechanical rhythm. Someone's pager buzzed. A monitor beeped steadily, indifferent to human drama. Katie didn't turn around. She was still in Trauma Bay 2, still charting, still breathing at the same measured pace she'd maintained for the last 37 minutes. Her pen didn't stop. Her hand didn't shake. She breathed once, slowly, the way someone breathes when they're in a situation they've trained for, and continued her charting as if he'd said nothing at all. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Hargrove smiled when she didn't react. Her composure fed him. It meant she was scared, he'd reasoned. It meant she was calculating her options, preparing her exit strategy. He'd seen this before. Young nurses always pretended strength for the first few weeks, and then reality set in, the 12-hour shifts, the thankless work, the salary that didn't match the sacrifice, the doctors who treated them like they existed for administrative tasks rather than clinical judgment. She'd break. They always did. What he didn't see was the way her grip on the pen changed. Just barely. The angle of her hand shifted, and her arm became the kind of steady that comes from having already survived the worst thing the world could do to you. You don't break after that. You just endure. Katie finished her charting. She moved to room 304 to check on Jensen. This time she looked at him longer. The tattoo. Her name. Written on his skin like a prayer or a promise, depending on who was reading it. She adjusted his full line, a peripheral inserted central catheter, a PICC line, running fluids at a steady rate to keep his body functioning while whatever was left of his consciousness floated somewhere unreachable. She knew Jensen. She knew him the way you know someone when you've carried them across a burning city, when you felt their weight against your chest and their blood mixing with yours and their heartbeat fading in and out like a radio signal getting weaker. She knew him like that. He showed no recognition. The traumatic brain injury had taken that. It had taken his memories, his identity, everything that made him Jensen. What it had left behind was a body that breathed and a name on his forearm that meant nothing to him anymore. Her hand rested on his shoulder for 3 seconds. Then she moved to the next task. The hours passed. 8 of them, 37 minutes. Katie worked through them the way she'd worked through worse things, methodically, precisely, without complaint. She assisted with a difficult-for placement on a pediatric patient with a hematoma that made the usual sights impossible. She helped calm a confused elderly woman who'd been brought in after a fall. She restocked supplies while the senior nurses seemed to move half as fast, complaining about their feet and their shifts and the way the system didn't respect them. She listened to all of it without comment. This was hospital work. It was necessary. It was the kind of work that kept people alive, and she'd always been good at keeping people alive. Dr. Hargrove moved through the ER with the presence of someone who expected the room to adjust itself for his convenience. He didn't greet patients. He didn't make eye contact with the staff. He moved through their space like he was walking through a museum, observing without engaging. And he watched Katie. Watched her work. Watched her complete a medication verification that caught an error his own resident had missed. Watched her position a patient for optimal comfort after a particularly difficult lumbar puncture. Watched her do the work of 3 nurses while looking like she was barely trying. By hour 6, he understood. This wasn't going to be a quick quit. This wasn't going to be a new nurse who'd come in starry-eyed and left when reality set in. This was something else. This was someone who moved like the work was familiar, like the chaos was something she'd trained for. Her competence wasn't the kind that came from nursing school and clinical experience. It was the kind that came from somewhere darker, somewhere harder. It was the kind that threatened men like him because it proved that titles and credentials and institutional power weren't actually the things that kept hospitals running. People like Katie kept hospitals running. And people like him were just obstacles. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds before his next move. He didn't make it yet. He was still calculating, still watching, still understanding that this would require more than public mockery. But something had shifted in the ER that day. The thermometer had dropped. The pressure had changed. By the time Katie clocked out at 11:06 p.m., the entire department had felt it. She walked to her locker. Opened it. Inside was a single change of clothes, a photograph she kept face down, and a jacket with a faded unit patch sewn carefully into the lining, the kind of patch you carried when you couldn't wear it anywhere visible. Not in a hospital where nobody knew what it meant. Not in Denver where she was supposed to be nobody. Not anywhere it could be traced. She pulled the jacket on. The patch stayed hidden, right where it belonged. Thursday afternoon at 2:33 p.m., Katie pushed her lunch tray through the cafeteria line, turkey sandwich, apple, bottled water, 1 cup of black coffee that smelled like burnt asphalt. She'd learned the cafeteria rhythms in 3 weeks. The doctor's table was always center of the room, loudest voices, first pick of the good chairs. Dr. Hargrove sat there like a man who'd never heard the word no. She was walking past when his hand shot out. The tray flipped. Gravity did the rest. Soup splatters across the tile floor in a viscous explosion, orange streaks like blood spray in the fluorescent light. The sandwich tumbled, landing cheese-side down. The apple rolled under the beverage station. Every conversation in the cafeteria died at the same moment, like someone had cut an audio feed. 50 heads turned. Katie stood there holding the edge of the tray, watching the last drops fall. "Oops," Hargrove said, his voice smooth as a tank idling in a garage. "Better clean that up, sweetheart." The other residents watched her. 2 of them, fresh out of their internal medicine rotations, shifted in their seats like they wanted to help but didn't know if they were allowed. The nurses at the corner table didn't move at all. Nobody moved. Katie knelt. The tile was still warm from the morning cleaning crew. She picked up the sandwich with 2 napkins, then the apple, then started wiping the soup with a paper towel that disintegrated under the moisture. She was reaching for another when Hargrove's patient chart landed at her feet with a hard slap. "Pick that up too while you're down there," he said. "Might be good practice for you." Katie's hands didn't shake. They were steady in Tikrit, steady under mortar fire, steady when she carried Jensen bleeding through 2 miles of exploding air. They were steady now. She rose slowly. Measured breath, the kind she'd learned in field medicine training, the kind that centers everything in your chest and nowhere else. She looked at Hargrove's face, really looked at it, and a single tear traced her cheek. Not from fear. From something colder. She wiped it away with the back of her hand without breaking eye contact. "I've cleaned up worse messes than you'll ever make," she said. Her voice didn't crack. It didn't shake. It sounded like someone who meant it. Hargrove's jaw tightened. His face hardened, not angry, but something worse. Confused. He'd thrown the dominance move at her like a punch, and she'd absorbed it without flinching. This wasn't how it worked. People cried or got angry or both. People didn't just stand up and walk away after that. People didn't say things like that. He opened his mouth. Then closed it. Katie turned and walked to the trash bin, dropped the ruined lunch, and walked out of the cafeteria. She could feel him watching her the whole way, and she knew what he was thinking. This was a nurse who didn't break. This was a nurse who'd already survived something worse than public humiliation. And that made her dangerous in a way Hargrove understood very well, not the danger of someone who fights back, but the danger of someone who'd already made peace with the worst possible outcome. The next morning, Hargrove cornered her at the nurse's station before shift change. The resident stood within earshot, he'd timed it that way. "Tell me, Nurse Rodriguez," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "did they teach you to read charts at your little community college, or are we working with a GED situation here?" His smile showed every tooth. "I'm genuinely curious. Your admission credentials are so thin it's almost like they're hiding something." Katie's hands didn't shake as she pulled up the morning lab results on the computer. Denver Community College, 2 years, RN prerequisites with a 3.9 GPA, she said, her voice steady as a surgical laser. Accelerated BSN from Metro State University. "You need me to spell any of those for you, doctor? Or did you want my GRE scores?" One of the residents, a young woman named Chen, actually looked away to hide a smile. Hargrove's face reddened. He walked away without another word, but the damage was done. The strategy had changed. If public mockery wouldn't work, he'd move to something more calculated. By Friday afternoon, she'd been called G.I. Jane 7 times. 8 if you counted the comment he made while she was organizing the supply closet with military precision, playing army nurse again, I see. The other nurses had stopped making eye contact by Thursday evening. By Friday morning, they'd moved their lunch breaks to when she wasn't on shift. Friday at 3:15 p.m., Hargrove called her into his office for a performance review he'd scheduled 2 weeks early. The shift supervisor sat beside him, uncomfortable and professional. Hargrove slid a written warning across his desk. 17 documented concerns, he said. Charting delays of 3 to 5 minutes. Restocking procedures done out of departmental sequence. A blood pressure cuff replaced in the incorrect drawer. I'm concerned about your attention to detail, Nurse Rodriguez. Your fine motor control. Your organizational cognition. He paused. Maybe hospital work isn't your calling. Maybe you should consider another profession. Katie's signature on the written warning was perfectly steady. No shake. No hesitation. She signed her name in the same precise block letters she'd used for 12 years, and when she stood to leave, she looked Hargrove directly in the eye. She didn't say anything. Some people could convey entire conversations without words, and Katie Rodriguez had learned to be that person. Saturday night arrived quiet and routine. Katie was restocking room 8 at 11:08 p.m. when the monitor alarm began in room 304. It wasn't a gentle rhythm. It was the violent electronic scream of a heart in chaotic deterioration. Flat line. She heard the announcement finish, Code Blue, Trauma Bay 4, but she was already moving before they finished the page. Jensen in room 304 was the man with her name tattooed on his forearm. The man she'd carried bleeding through Tikrit streets while bullets tore the air. The man whose TBI meant he looked at her every day like she was a stranger. She reached him as his body seized, eyes rolling back, oxygen saturation plummeting on the monitor. 62. 58. 40. His neck veins distended like cords. His breath came shallow and desperate. His blood pressure dropped to 60/40ths and kept falling. Cardiac tamponade. The pericardial sac filling with blood, collapsing the heart chambers, killing him 1 second at a time. Dr. Hargrove arrived 30 seconds later, already calling for the crash cart, already in command mode. Katie was positioning the defibrillator pads when she spoke quietly. Cardiac tamponade. He needs a pericardiocentesis now or he codes out. Hargrove waved her off like she'd suggested a home remedy. Ultrasound for confirmation. Get the tech. Ultrasound is 15 minutes out. He has 3. Then we wait for ultrasound, Nurse Rodriguez. Katie looked at Jensen's face, at the faded blue letters on his forearm that spelled her call sign, and something inside her shifted back into alignment. All the careful civilian behavior, all the hidden competence, all the restraint burned away like morning fog under a desert sun. She reached for the pericardiocentesis kit. Opened it with both hands, moving with the muscle memory of field medicine, of trauma surgery in a tent while generators failed and people died because the only thing between them and death was steady hands and knowledge. I'm doing the procedure, she said. Hargrove's voice went cold. You are not authorized. You touch that kit and you're finished here. Done. Gone. Security will escort you out, and I'll file termination papers before your shift ends. Katie met his eyes. Took one measured breath. Then I'm done. Her hands found the xiphoid process, marked the anatomy, inserted the 18-gauge needle at a 45-degree angle. The hiss of air escaping as she aspirated 50 milliliters of blood from the pericardial sac. The monitor began its climb. 60. 65. 70. Jensen's eyes fluttered open. His pressure stabilized. His oxygen came back. She set down the needle as security arrived at the door, their faces confused about what they were witnessing. The code blue that just became a save. Hargrove stared at her from across the bed like he was looking at someone he'd never seen before. Someone he didn't recognize. That was unauthorized, he said quietly. Yes, Katie said. She was already peeling off her gloves. Call the administrator. Make the complaint. I need some jello. Saturday night at 11:02 p.m., the monitors in room 304 began their ascending symphony of alarm. Katie was 3 corridors away, restocking the trauma supply cabinet with the methodical precision of someone who'd counted rounds under fire, when the intercom crackled, code blue, room 304. All available personnel. She didn't run. Running suggested panic. She moved instead with the fluid efficiency of muscle memory, her body already making calculations her conscious mind hadn't finished processing. The supply cabinet door clicked shut. Her feet covered 30 meters in 11 seconds. The night shift nurses were still gathering their equipment when she pushed through the ICU double doors, and what they saw was not the timid third-week ER nurse who'd been absorbing Dr. Hargrove's contempt for 22 days. What they saw was someone else entirely. Jensen lay flatlined, his tattoo, her name inked across his forearm in fading black, invisible beneath the blur of hands working his chest. The monitor showed asystole. No electrical activity. The attending on call, Dr. Morrison's resident, was already 3 cycles into compressions and losing focus, his rhythm slowing, his pressure dropping. 2 nurses hung epinephrine. 1 prepared for defibrillation. The room moved like it was underwater. Katie's eyes crossed the space in one sweep, vitals, equipment, time elapsed. Her voice came out steady as a laser. Stop compressions. The resident hesitated. That hesitation cost 7 seconds. I said stop. He stopped. 3 nurses froze. Katie was already moving, her hands reaching for the bedside tray where a long-bore needle sat waiting. The kind you used when the heart was drowning in its own fluid. When the sac around it filled with blood and pressure crushed everything closed. When the only way to buy time was to guide steel through tissue with the certainty of someone who'd done it in a darkened military hospital with incoming fire rattling the windows. Pericardiocentesis. Not authorized for ER nurses. Not taught in most nursing programs. Learned in a place where you did what you had to or people died with your name as the last thing they remembered. She swabbed Jensen's chest with antiseptic. The smell cut through the room like copper and alcohol. Her left hand found the angle, 5th intercostal space, just below the xiphoid process, angling toward the left shoulder, and her right hand moved with the kind of certainty that silenced questions before they could form. The needle went in. 2 centimeters. 3. Nurses held their breath. The resident watched with his mouth open like he was watching surgery performed by someone who shouldn't exist. The hiss came like air escaping from a tire. Blood followed. Dark and thick and immediate. The syringe pulled back. 5 milliliters. 10. 15. With each pull, the pressure released. The monitors began their descent from red zone screaming into something approaching stable. Katie's hands didn't shake. They never did. Pain was information. Blood was data. A needle finding the right space between heartbeats was just geometry and training and the muscle memory of having done it when the alternative was carrying bodies out of a destroyed compound in Tikrit with the sound of helicopter rotors overhead. 20 milliliters of blood. The monitor beeped. Once. Twice. Then the rhythm returned, not perfect, but present. Sinus. Organized. Alive. The resident exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for a year. Katie stepped back. The needle remained in place. The syringe hung at Jensen's chest like the world's smallest victory flag. She looked at the monitor. Blood pressure climbing. Oxygen saturation rising. 82. 88. 91. The kind of climb you only got when you'd done something exactly right. One of the night shift nurses, Rachel, who'd been kind about explaining the hospital's charting system during Katie's second week, whispered something that should have stayed inside her skull. How did you know to do that? Katie didn't answer. Answers required explanations. Explanations required honesty about things that had been classified as dead weight and buried in administrative purgatory years ago. Instead, she moved toward the four-stand to adjust the infusion rate and saw Jensen's eyes flutter. Not awake, but closer. His hand twitched. The hand with her name on it. The hand of a man she dragged through 2 miles of Tikrit Street fire in 2009 with his abdomen open and his lungs failing, and the certainty that if she let go, that was the end of both their stories. She'd let him go once. She'd handed him to the medevac team and watched the helicopter rise and never expected to see him again. That was the deal with extraction work. You got people to safety. You didn't get reunions. The universe apparently had other plans. By 12:15 a.m., Jensen was stable enough for the ICU nurses to take him back. His monitor showed sinus rhythm at 104 beats per minute. Color was returning to his face. Katie removed the compression pads and stepped away, peeling off her gloves with the deliberate care of someone who knew exactly where to fold them so the contaminated interior stayed concealed from sight. Gloves snapped as she discarded them, a sound like small-caliber gunfire in the sudden quiet of the room. She didn't wait for gratitude or questions. She turned and walked out, and by the time she reached the corridor, her phone was already vibrating in her scrub pocket. A text from an unknown number. Unknown numbers meant one of two things: Pentagon business she'd thought was finished, or the hospital beginning the process of destroying her in ways that didn't involve her job title. The text read, "I need to speak with you about unauthorized procedures. Come to my office at 6 a.m. before your shift. Dr. Hargrove." Of course it was Hargrove. Katie stared at the message for 4 seconds. Long enough to know that what she'd done in room 304 wasn't going to be celebrated as a save. It was going to be prosecuted as a violation. She'd stepped outside her scope of practice. She'd performed a procedure that required physician authorization. She'd made the attending physician look like he was standing still while she operated at an entirely different altitude. In the institutional hierarchy of hospitals, there was no worse crime than exposing the gap between competence and credentials. She turned and walked toward the supply cabinet to finish restocking. The work had to be done whether the hospital was about to crucify her or not. The supplies didn't care about her rank or her past or the fact that she'd kept a man alive long enough for his daughter to see him one more time. They just needed to be counted and categorized and prepared for the next disaster. What Katie didn't know, what the night shift nurses whispered about as they charted the impossible save, was that Dr. Hargrove was already on the phone at 12:33 a.m., his voice low and controlled and carrying the particular intensity of a man whose authority had just been challenged in front of his entire team. He'd called Chairman Morrison at home. He'd used the words liability situation and unauthorized procedure and credential fraud. He'd mentioned, very carefully, that perhaps Katie's personnel file should be audited by someone external. Someone objective. Someone who reported directly to him. Dr. Hargrove did not congratulate her. He stood in the trauma bay watching Katie stabilize Jensen's collapsed lung with the kind of precision that belonged in an operating room, not an emergency department, and his jaw tightened as the monitor climbed, oxygen saturation rising from 68 to 78 to 89. And the attending physician stepped back without a word because they knew they were watching something they didn't have. He watched for exactly 90 seconds. Then he turned and walked to his office without speaking to anyone, his expensive leather shoes clicking against the tile in a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. The office door closed. The lock engaged. And Dr. Hargrove picked up his phone at 11:44 p.m. He called the hospital board chairman, David Sterling, at home. Sterling answered on the third ring, irritated. It was nearly midnight, but Hargrove's voice was carefully modulated, the tone of a concerned colleague rather than a vengeful man. "David, I need to discuss a credentialing issue with our new ER nurse, Katie Rodriguez. I'm seeing some irregularities. Nothing concrete yet, but concerning enough that I wanted to loop you in before it becomes a liability." Sterling, half asleep and predisposed to trust a 23-year tenured physician over a 3-week probationary hire, agreed to activate an external review. Hargrove hung up and made the next call. He contacted Katie's references, the nursing directors at 2 Denver clinics where she'd supposedly worked, with vague language designed to plant seeds without committing to accusations. Just doing a routine follow-up on Rodriguez. Stellar on paper, but I'm picking up some instability. Nothing I can pin down. You notice anything concerning? The directors, loyal to their field and protective of their reputations, hesitated just long enough in their responses that Hargrove could interpret their silence as confirmation. By the time he hung up, the narrative had already begun to solidify. The promising new nurse was hiding something. Competent on the surface, unstable underneath. Then he made the call that would destroy her. He contacted an investigative firm specializing in healthcare credentialing, a company called Meridian Verification Services that had deep access to state licensing boards, military databases, and federal employment records. I need a comprehensive background review on a registered nurse. Flag any gaps, any inconsistencies, anything that doesn't match her stated experience. He provided Katie's social security number, information he had no authorization to request, but the investigator didn't ask questions. Meridian worked for hospitals, and hospitals paid them very well. The investigator started at 6 a.m. the next morning. He pulled Katie's Colorado RN license, clean, recently issued. He cross-referenced her nursing school transcript from University of Colorado, excellent grades, clinical honors. He checked her employment history in the state system, 2 clinics in Denver, both corroborating her employment dates. Then he moved to the military records. He ran her name through the VA system. Nothing. He checked Department of Defense personnel databases. Nothing. He contacted the Navy Medical Corps directly, providing her social security number. The response came back standard and careful, no record of individual matching provided identifiers in active or reserve status. That was impossible for someone who claimed to have worked as a trauma nurse for the military. The investigator dug deeper. He checked federal contractor databases. Nothing. He ran her against classified personnel lists using his government-issued credentials, a service that cost Meridian significant annual fees. The result was always the same: Katie Rodriguez did not exist in any military system. Her credentials were perfect. Her employment was verifiable. Her nursing experience was documented. But there was a ghost space where a military background should have been, not an absence of record, but an active erasure. The kind of erasure that happened when someone had been deliberately removed from official existence. By 2 p.m., the investigator had completed his report. He called Hargrove with the findings. Her nursing credentials are spotless, Dr. Hargrove. No violations, no complaints, nothing to flag. However, there are significant gaps in her stated background. She claims to have worked military contracts in 2009 and 2010, but there's no record of her in any military system. The gaps are suspicious but not technically violations of credentialing requirements. Hargrove smiled. The gaps didn't matter. The suspicion was enough. He walked into Administrator Patricia Valdez's office at 7 a.m. on Wednesday morning with the investigator's report in hand and a recommendation for immediate termination. The investigator found inconsistencies in her background that suggest she may have falsified her application. Military service, she claims, doesn't exist in any system. That's grounds for immediate termination for fraudulent credentialing. Patricia, fatigued from the overnight shift and inclined to trust her senior physicians, signed the termination paperwork without calling Katie first. Protocol required a meeting, but protocol could be expedited. By 9 a.m., hospital security had been notified. Katie was in the break room refilling her water bottle when the security guard appeared in the doorway. "Ms. Rodriguez? You need to come with me." She followed without asking questions, already knowing. She'd felt the shift in the air, the way the other nurses had stopped talking when she entered a room, the way Hargrove had stopped acknowledging her existence. The guard escorted her to the administrative offices where Patricia Valdez waited with a folder thick with paperwork. "Katie, we've completed our credentialing review and found significant inconsistencies in your background employment history. Based on the investigator's findings, we have to terminate your employment effective immediately for fraudulent application materials and unauthorized scope of practice. Security will escort you from the building. Katie's voice stayed level. I did not falsify anything. We can't verify your military background. You claimed experience you apparently don't have. That's falsification. Patricia wouldn't meet her eyes. You'll receive information about severance and benefits continuation. I'm sorry. The walk from the administrative office to the main entrance took 4 minutes. Security walked 1 step behind her, professional and impersonal. Other staff members watched from hallways and nursing stations. The girl who'd saved a Marine's life yesterday was being escorted out like a criminal today. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with their fluorescent light hum, the same hum that had soundtracked her entire 3 weeks at Mercy General, and now it sounded like a dirge. As Katie pushed through the lobby doors into the morning sunlight, she saw Hargrove standing in the corridor watching from his office window, 3 floors up. His arms were crossed. His expression was satisfied. She didn't stop. She didn't look back. She drove to Fort Logan National Cemetery without going home to change. She was still wearing her hospital scrubs, still wearing her badge clipped to her collar, still wearing the ghost of her professional life. The rain started somewhere around Broadway, a light mist that thickened into a downpour by the time she reached the cemetery gates. She parked and walked to Section G, Row 18, Grave 44. The marble headstone was cold against her palms. Marcus Rodriguez. Navy SEAL. 1979 to 2018. She knelt in the mud, the ground was soft from the rain, clay and earth pressing into her knees, and her voice came out broken. I tried to stay hidden like you asked, Marcus. After Tikrit, after they buried the operation and erased me, I tried so hard. You told me to disappear, that it was the only way to keep Miguel safe. Rain ran down her face in rivers. Her scrubs were soaked through. I became a nurse because I thought I could still save people without a uniform. Without being seen. I thought invisibility would keep us safe. She pressed her forehead against the cold marble. I failed. I failed Jensen, he's alive, but he'll never know who pulled him out. I failed you. I failed at being invisible. The rain hammered harder, drumming against the cemetery grass. They fired me for saving him. And the worst part is they're right. I don't exist on paper. I'm a ghost playing pretend. I'm a shadow that tried to be human and got caught doing both. She stayed there until the rain had soaked through her scrubs and plastered her hair against her neck, until her knees were caked in mud, until there was nothing left in her to cry. Then she sat back on her heels and looked at the headstone and whispered one final thing, but that wasn't the worst part. She drove home in darkness. That night, at 7:43 p.m., Miguel found her sitting at the kitchen table staring at nothing. Her scrubs were still wet. Her hair dripped slowly onto the table. She didn't acknowledge him until he spoke. Mom, what happened? Katie tried to smile. Just a bad day, mijo. But Miguel had been watching her for 3 weeks. He understood the difference between her combat days, the ones where she came home with controlled energy, her movements precise and her eyes clear, and her peace days when she could almost be a normal mother. This was something else. This was an erased day. A disappeared day. He went to the garage and found the shadow box she'd made him promise never to open. It sat on the highest shelf, behind the emergency supplies, tucked behind boxes of Christmas decorations. He carried it inside and set it on the table in front of his mother. Mom, they need to see these. You can't let him win. Katie's entire body went rigid. Miguel, no. You don't understand. I was ordered to disappear. If those surface, her voice dropped to barely a whisper. The Pentagon will know I broke protocol. There could be consequences. Legal consequences. Then you stop being a ghost, Miguel said, and his 16-year-old voice carried more certainty than Katie had heard in 4 years. You told me you saved 50 Marines in Tikrit. You told me you carried them out one by one. They need to know who you are. Wednesday afternoon, the Mercy General lobby was moving at the pace of a normal day, families checking in, insurance papers being shuffled, the waiting room humming with the low-level anxiety that hospitals always carried like a patient's steady heartbeat. Katie was restocking the supply closet on the third floor when her phone buzzed. Text from Miguel, "I'm here. Meet me in the lobby." "I brought it." Her hand stilled on the boxes of gauze. She knew exactly what it meant. The shadow box. The thing she'd kept sealed in Miguel's closet for 4 years, the thing she'd told him never to touch, never to open, never to bring to her workplace. She set down the gauze and moved toward the stairs. Her boots made no sound on the tile. When she rounded the corner into the main lobby, she saw him immediately. Miguel, 16 years old, standing near the main entrance with the shadow box held against his chest like a shield. He looked small in that moment, not because of his size, but because of what he was carrying. The lobby traffic had begun to notice. A woman in the waiting area glanced up from her phone. One of the ER techs paused at the reception desk. The energy in the room shifted the way it does when someone walks in carrying something they shouldn't. Miguel's eyes found hers across the lobby. His jaw was clenched. When he spoke, his voice cracked exactly the way it had when his father died, that sound of a boy trying to be a man and barely holding together. "Mom, they need to see these." He held the box higher. "You can't let him win. You can't just disappear again." Katie moved toward him with the measured pace she'd used 100 times in hostile environments. Her face showed nothing. The lobby was quieting now, nurses glancing over from the station, patients noticing the shift in air pressure. She reached Miguel and took the box from his hands. Her hands were steady. They had held dying Marines in her arms while bullets hit concrete around them. They would not shake now. "Here," Miguel said. "Right here. Let them see." She opened the shadow box. The lobby went dead silent. Inside, arranged in perfect military precision, lay 4 medals hanging from ribbon bars. Bronze Star. Silver Star. Purple Heart. Purple Heart again. And beneath them, pinned to the velvet backing in a position of honor, a Navy Cross, the ribbon a diagonal burn of blue and gold, the medal itself a bronze cross suspended from a blue ribbon, and hanging from that cross, an anchor and the profile of Hernan Cortez. The medal that a soldier received for extraordinary heroism under fire. The medal that only 3,512 sailors had ever earned in the entire history of the United States Navy. A doctor dropped his clipboard. It clattered against the tile floor like a gunshot. Patricia Valdez, the hospital administrator, moved forward from her office. Her hands trembled as she read the citations. Her lips moved silently at first, then Senior Chief Petty Officer Katie Rodriguez. Navy Cross recipient. She looked up at Katie as if seeing her for the first time. "Tikrit." Katie didn't answer. She didn't need to. The ER nurse supervisor, a woman named Chen who'd worked the night shift with Katie for 3 weeks without knowing her name, stepped closer. "Bronze Star. Silver Star. 3 Purple Hearts." The color drained from her face. "That was you," Chen whispered. "That's all you." The elevator doors opened. A Marine colonel in dress blue stepped out, Colonel Warren, 63 years old, visiting his grandson in the ICU. He'd been walking toward the exit when he heard the lobby silence. When he saw the medals, his entire body straightened. Military posture. The kind of spine that came from 34 years of command. He moved toward Katie. The lobby parted for him. "The Marines taught you to move like that, like your weight meant something, like the air itself made room for you." He came to attention in front of her, and his voice, when it came, was the kind of command that belonged in a different world than this hospital. It belonged in sand and heat and the rotor wash of helicopters coming in hard. Senior Chief Petty Officer Katie Rodriguez, Navy Cross recipient, led the extraction of 50 Marines from an ambush at Route Michigan, Tikrit, during Operation Phantom Fury, while under sustained enemy fire. His voice carried through the lobby like a radio transmission. "She carried them out. one by one. While taking fire. Every single Marine walked out because she refused to leave them. The fluorescent lights hummed above them, that electric buzz that lived in every hospital, the sound of electricity running through metal and glass and the weight of lives depending on you. Katie felt it now, that sound, but it seemed far away. The lobby had become a different place. Time had folded. She was standing in two places at once, in this lobby in Denver, and in Tikrit, in 2009, 17 years old in a nurse's uniform, carrying a dying boy named Jensen through the blood and fire. Chen was crying silently. Other nurses had come out of the ER. Patricia Valdez stood frozen, understanding now what she'd let Hargrove do to her hospital, to this woman standing in the center of the lobby with her son beside her and 50 Marines worth of scars under her skin. The lobby doors burst open. 2 FBI agents entered with the kind of coordinated movement that said Federal Task Force, that said they'd been waiting outside for this exact moment. One of them, a woman with a badge visible on her belt, moved directly to the information desk and asked for Dr. Leonard Hargrove. "He's in his office," Patricia said. Her voice sounded broken. "Third floor." The agents nodded to their backup. They moved toward the stairs. The second agent turned toward the assembled hospital staff. "Dr. Leonard Hargrove has been under federal investigation for 3 months, she said. Her voice was precise, clip-smooth, the voice of someone who'd delivered this speech before. He accessed classified Department of Defense databases without authorization to investigate a protected witness in an active federal case. She looked directly at Katie. "We've been waiting for her to leave the hospital to make an arrest that wouldn't compromise her safety. Thank you for facilitating that." 20 minutes later, Dr. Hargrove walked out of his office in handcuffs. The lobby erupted. Reporters who'd gotten word were already lined up outside the glass doors, cameras trained on the moment his face appeared. He looked smaller in custody than he had in the ER. Arrested power looked different from unchecked power. It looked like a man who'd spent his entire career moving through institutions because he knew the rules, and now the rules had turned on him because he'd broken a rule bigger than the hospital. The cameras caught everything. They caught his face, the moment he saw Katie standing there with the medals visible, the moment his entire constructed reality disintegrated in real time. They caught the federal agents reading him his rights. They caught Patricia Valdez standing with her arms crossed, her face a mask of institutional betrayal. They caught Miguel's hand on his mother's shoulder. By Thursday morning, the story had gone viral. Local news led with the headline, "Denver Nurse Revealed as Decorated Military Hero." National news followed by Friday. By Sunday, the hospital board had called an emergency meeting, and Patricia Valdez read the termination decision not in a conference room, but right there in the lobby, in front of cameras and staff and the ghost of every protocol Hargrove had violated. Her voice was steady. "Dr. Leonard Hargrove is terminated effective immediately for harassment of staff, abuse of authority, and violation of federal witness protection protocols. His medical privileges at Mercy General are permanently revoked." The board chairman, Morrison, added his own statement with his hands shaking. "We are launching a full investigation into Dr. Hargrove's tenure and will cooperate completely with federal authorities." Within 72 hours, Hargrove's wife filed for divorce. By the following week, the state medical board suspended his license pending full investigation. Federal charges were filed: obstruction of justice, unauthorized access to classified databases, witness intimidation. His lawyers couldn't stop the cascade. The hospital investigation revealed 17 prior complaints from nurses, all of them buried by Morrison in exchange for Hargrove's silence about board members' affairs and malpractice suits. Morrison resigned. Hargrove took a plea deal: 6 months home detention, probation, and permanent revocation of his medical license. 6 months later, a former colleague named Richardson spotted him at Denver Community College's continuing education building. Hargrove was teaching CPR certification courses, the kind for teenagers who needed the credential to work as lifeguards. He wore a polo shirt with the college logo. He'd shortened his name to Len because Dr. Hargrove still got recognized, still got people looking up the lobby video on their phones. He finished that particular course in silence, packed his training mannequin into a rolling case with the methodical movements of a man who'd run out of other options, and drove home to his one-bedroom apartment in Aurora where the walls were so thin he could hear his neighbor's television bleeding through the drywall. His ex-wife had the house. His daughter hadn't returned his calls in 4 months. He was calculating at night how many CPR courses to make rent, how many summers of minimum wage to rebuild something resembling a life. Katie didn't think about him anymore. 3 weeks after her reinstatement, Patricia Valdez offered her the ER director position. Katie declined with the same composure she'd shown in the lobby. "I'm a corpsman," she said. "I belong with patients. At the bedside." Valdez understood. She didn't push. Jensen in room 304 had been transferred to the VA for ongoing treatment of his traumatic brain injury. Katie visited him twice, once a week after reinstatement, once 2 weeks later. The second visit, his eyes focused for a moment. They actually saw her. "Do I know you?" he asked. His voice was soft, rebuilt through months of therapy. She smiled. The kind of smile that came from someplace deeper than her chest. "Yeah. From a long time ago." He looked at the tattoo on his forearm. The name, Rodriguez. Spelled out in ink, a memorial to someone his damaged brain couldn't retrieve. "That's you," he said. It wasn't a question. "That's me." He took her hand. His grip was still strong despite everything. "Thank you," he said. "I don't know what for, but thank you." That afternoon, Miguel came to the hospital after school. He found his mother in the break room with her hands on the shadow box, not the medals inside it, but the bottom compartment, where the faded unit patch waited. The eagle anchor globe, worn from being sewn inside jacket linings for 4 years of hiding. For years of ghost protocol. For years of staying invisible because that was what it cost to keep the people you loved alive. "You don't have to hide anymore, Mom," Miguel said. Katie took the patch from his hands. The embroidery was faded almost to the point of invisibility, but it was still there. 50 Marines, Tikrit, 2009, and the fact of her survival. She studied it for a long moment, the way soldiers study objects that mean something beyond words, and then she pinned it to her scrubs. That afternoon, when she walked back onto the ER floor, nurses saw it and understood. The quiet woman had become visible. The ghost had a name. The corpsman had come home. By 1400 hours that same day, 50 active duty Marines arrived at Mercy General in dress blues. They formed up outside the ER entrance in parade formation, perfect spacing, perfect alignment, the kind of military geometry that said these men had trained together, died together, and would stand formation together until the war ended or they did. They'd heard the story through core networks, the legend of the ghost who'd pulled them out of Tikrit, the woman they'd never thanked because they'd never known her name. Colonel Warren commanded, "Present arms." 50 Marines saluted in perfect unison. The movement was synchronized the way only 20 years of discipline makes possible. Their arms rose at the exact same angle, hands positioned with the precision of a single organism. The salute hung in the Denver air like a prayer. Katie walked outside in her scrubs with the unit patch visible. Miguel stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder. She returned the salute, the hand rising to her brow, the fingers positioned exactly as they had been when she was in uniform, 17 years ago, the last time she'd let herself be visible. One of the reporters asked her what she wanted people to know. What message did she want to send? Katie looked at the Marines in their dress blues. She looked at her son. She looked at the hospital where she'd fought to stay invisible and almost failed. "You don't need a badge or a gun to be a warrior," she said. "You just need to refuse to quit." The Marines held their salute until she walked back inside, and then they dispersed. Their mission was complete. They never left their own behind, even if it took 14 years to find them. Even if the warrior they came to honor didn't know she was legendary until the day the truth couldn't stay hidden anymore. Katie returned to the ER as the hospital's senior corpsman. She took the bedside work that other nurses avoided. She spent her shifts in the trauma bays with the broken bodies, the ones who'd seen the worst. She knew what they needed, not pity, not distance, but the presence of someone who understood that survival was a choice you made every single day, every single moment, and the ones who'd made it once could make it again. Subscribe, like, and comment with your thoughts. What would you have done in Katie's position? Did she deserve the recognition, or should she have stayed hidden?